it does change your perspective to realize that, we are not promised tomorrow, and we have to make the most of our time.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Carganilla Online Variety Entertainment Podcast. Here's your host, Paul Carganilla.
Hello and welcome to COVE. This is the online variety show in which we aim to both entertain and inspire our podcast listeners and YouTube viewers through a variety of art forms, including music, storytelling, special guest interviews, and more. Today, we have a guest who is an author, and his journey into writing and storytelling was born from a very uncertain time in his life. I can't wait to talk to him about that. But first, let's say hello and welcome and check in with producer Craig Jackman behind the scenes here. Producer Craig, welcome.
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. It's so great to be here. And actually, I am very excited about this interview today because let's just say that the circumstances have touched my family, and I'm sure it's touched a lot of people's family. The foundation to the circumstances for which we are talking about today.
Yeah, and we can't wait to speak with him. Our guest is located in Anderson, Indiana, and as I mentioned, he's an author and storyteller. His books spin tales of murder mysteries and outer space, generally with a heaping spoonful of humor. As a storyteller, he performs around central Indiana to both adults and children. He weaves together a mix of stories, songs, poems, and jokes that can transport audiences into another time and place. That sounds exactly what we try to do here in COVE Podcast. That aligns so perfectly. He specializes in stories of Ireland and Scotland, but is equally comfortable talking and singing about growing up in Indiana, pirates, history, and more. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Carganilla Online Variety Entertainment Podcast, author Gary Randolph.
Hi, Paul. Hi, Craig. Good to be with you today.
Oh, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And I was so excited when you reached out and said, you'd love to be a guest because you kind of shared a little bit about your creative journey and your story. And I got to head over to your website, and it looks like you do a lot of fun stuff in your entertainment exploits. Can you tell us about what your regular entertainment gigs kind of consist of?
Well, I do storytelling, as you mentioned, and not just telling the stories, but I also sing songs and have some group sing-alongs. I have a few poems that I pop into there and some jokes, and just try to take people into place. As you said, a lot of my storytelling centers around Ireland and Scotland, and so I try to bring people into the culture with the legends and with the music.
All right. Well, let's get to know you a little bit better before I start asking questions that you're already going to answer in your icebreaker introduction, where you tell us everything we could possibly learn about you in a minute or less. Now, I won't cut you off if you go long, because I like to hear what it is that everybody includes when they are faced with this challenge. But Gary, can you tell us everything we might be able to learn about you in under a minute?
I'll see what I can do.
All right, let's try it in 3, 2, 1.
I was born and raised on a farm in Indiana back in the 1960s. So that's another foreign land that I include in my storytelling, just as foreign to our time and place now as Ireland or Scotland has. So my first audiences were the cows, and I would sing to the cows, and I tell you, that's a tough crowd. I had to keep reminding myself they're not saying boo, they're saying moo. But so one of my great hobbies is bicycling. I do 60 to 100 miles a week, and we've alluded to my troubles that I've had in the past. Coming out of that 10 years ago, cycling was how I felt strong again. Another thing that I'm proud of, we've been doing this for some 20 years, some friends of mine get together periodically for essentially a live version of Mystery Science Theater 3000. If you remember that old show,
Sure.
we watch some B movies and make fun of them and give trophies and have snacks and just have a great time. Almost, let's see what else. I bake a pretty good scone, and that's probably about a minute there.
You're right. That's a minute and a half, but how much fun information there. And so can you tell us about, if you were born and raised there out in the countryside, where did the whole Ireland, Scotland roots come from?
I can remember as a child going up into my parents' house, what we called the junk room, which just had boxes of things all around, and pulled out an old 3-ring binder and opening it up. And it was a genealogy that someone had done of my mother's family called, they were the McCarts. It started with a legendary Irish king who, come to find out, may or may not have actually existed, and then mainly skipped to the 20th century to record all the second and third cousins all around the country. But that got me interested in genealogy and also all things Ireland. And that expanded over time to more of the Celtic peoples in Scotland, and doing genealogy and DNA. I am mainly Scottish and Irish, and so I've always been interested in those cultures and the stories.
Very cool. Have you ever been or visited those countries?
Yes, I've been to Ireland twice and Scotland once. We want to go back. The pandemic got in the way of some plans, but we're planning to do that probably in the next year.
Let's talk about your creative journey. We like to, on this show, explore what led people down the path or what caused them to finally take the first step on a journey they've been wanting to explore for a while. And you had mentioned that yours kind of stemmed from something that happened in your life. You mentioned cycling helped you get stronger from it 10 years ago. What can you tell us about that time?
Yeah, let's start back before that. I started a software company back in the 1980s, eventually sold that, became a computer professor, eventually left that job to work on my own in software development for individual clients. But throughout all of that, I've always written. I wrote user manuals. When we had the company, I wrote sales brochures. When I was a professor, I wrote academic papers and even a textbook on the SQL database language. So I've always been writing. I started some creative writing in the early 2000s, writing comedy and dramatic sketches for churches, as well as some longer drama pieces. So it was wrote that with a partner named Doug Irving, and we published those for a while under the name Over the Top Publishing. And then my life had a sort of a reboot in 2013 when I contracted Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, that's if as they've said, as the doctor told me, if you're going to get a cancer, that's a pretty good one to get. The risk of surviving that is pretty high, though at times it seemed like the chemo was going to kill me. That was at a time, just a few years before that, just 3 years before that, I quit my job as a professor and was trying to build up independent consulting. That all fell apart and had to be rebuilt. I did do some work during that time, but my brain was just fuzzy the whole time. So coming out of that, I found, I had changed, not really personality wise, but I don't know. I didn't go back to writing drama sketches. Um, it's not like I really lost interest in that. It's just more like the 6 months of chemo was a complete break, and all of the inertia of the things that we just do every day, every week, because we did them yesterday, we did them last week. That was all stopped
Hmm.
and and restarted. And so those things kind of fell away, and it opened up a chance to find new things. And that was storytelling. I had already I kind of started with the Irish and Scottish storytelling. That had always, as I'd said already, been an interest of mine. And I have a big party at my house once a year in the fall that I call Celtic Fest. And I treat it way more important than it deserves. But it's just always a fun time. And we started doing a thing called a ceilidh, which is an Irish and Scottish kind of party with music. And I wanted to tell some stories on that. Well, then that led to me going out and performing for some other people. And, I've gone all over the state and, telling stories and singing songs of that. And then a few years ago, I wanted to start writing. And I first published a collection of my Irish and Scottish stories. Then I said, well, what else, might I want to write? And I first came out with a book called Alien World, which is kind of a traditional sci-fi. But then I don't know. I've always had kind of a comedic bent. And I think especially coming out of cancer, you just have to take yourself lightly.
Mm.
You just have to look for fun. And so my other books since then have been in more of a comedic vein. I've got a series of books called The Galactic Detective Agency. It's currently 7 books, and they're kind of lighthearted mysteries with space aliens. It's a story of a computer professional like myself, only younger, in Indianapolis, and he gets signed up into an alien detective agency, and they fly around the galaxy solving crimes. I spun off a couple of characters from one of the books, that were based on P.J. Wodehouse's classic characters, Jeeves and Wooster.
Huh.
And I've always loved those books. And so in one book, I put in a couple of characters that were an homage to that, inspired by that. And so I spun off those 2 characters into not a mystery, but just a wacky sci-fi adventure. And that one's called, the first one in that series is Viva, Vogus. And I've got another one coming out early next year in that series.
That's amazing. And I'm just looking, I just did a quick Amazon search, and it looks like you've already got 7 collections here on Amazon under your author named Gary Blaine Randolph. There's Return of the Judy, Trouble in Paradox, A Town Called Potato, The Maltese Salmon, The Big Sneap, Murder on, is it Jersu? The Jersu Express?
Gersu Express, yeah.
Gersu Express, and The Cormabite Maneuver.
Mm-hmm.
So much. It just seems like a ton of fun, and we can't wait we're going to hear you read a little bit of some selections that you have prepared to share with us here on the podcast. But I wanted to jump back real quick and talk to you about when you were first diagnosed with the Hodgkin's lymphoma. What was that feeling when you first heard the diagnosis? What kind of feeling, or what went through your head?
Yeah, there's a lot of there's a lot of shock. It just like there's a certain unreality there when you start hearing the C word there. And of course, the doctor was very quick to say this has like a 75-80% survival rate, and the chances of it coming back are low. So this will be fine. And so you say, okay, that'll be good. I have this 6-month period. I'll have to change a lot of things. I know I've known people obviously who've gone through cancer, and I've seen what it does to them. So I knew it would be a big setback. But you know what? You really don't know how much of a setback it is until you experience it. I mentioned the fuzzy brainedness, but there's also when you're doing chemo, you get a bad taste in your mouth that you just can't get rid of. And there are times when it's, you're just like, oh my gosh, I'm not living, I'm just existing. And that's what I tell people when I talk to people who are going through cancer. Your job is just to get past it.
Right.
Your job right now is to go to the appointments, do the chemo, do the radiation, whatever it is, and just hang on, and then come out the other side. I had a lot of support from my wife and from good friends. I got a lot of cards, and we got some meals, and we got a good support system in that.
That's it's so funny that you mentioned that, because I was literally just about to ask what kind of support system you had in place, because I know that's such a huge part of getting through it, is just not being able to. You need help from all sides to get through something like that. So I'm glad to hear your wife and friends were there for you. And on our live stream and YouTube, everyone's just sending you love and saying that sounds so tough, and they applaud you. And we're all certainly so glad you made it through. I wondered about while you're going through it, and while you're fighting. You say there's an 75 to 80% survival rate, but 20% sounds really high on the other side. If that's something you're facing, it's got to be so terrifying in so many ways. And I wonder if that I don't know, the reminder of mortality really helped you switch focus to your writing and your storytelling and what you still wanted to do with your time here.
Well, it does. Although, and I'll be real honest with you, coming out of cancer, I went into depression, and it was because you're just so confronted with the mortality of life. And coming out of it, I said, okay, I've got through this, but now, I've got X number of years, and this bad thing could happen, and that bad thing could happen, and this bad thing could happen. Right. And it kind of snowballed in my emotions. I said to my oncologist, I'm feeling depressed in this. And oncologists who, are not known for their bedside manner said, why are you depressed? You just beat cancer, but another doctor, got me some antidepressants, which just kind of got me over the hump, and I was fine. But it does change your perspective. It makes you much more appreciative of the present. And when I was going through cancer, I had 2 grandsons. One was so small that he would not have remembered me had I died. And since then, we've gotten 2 more twin grandsons who are currently 4.5, and a baby granddaughter on the way. And, so I keep a list of wonderful life experiences that I have had since 2013. And that includes the second trip to Ireland. That includes, this last summer we went to Alaska. The enjoyment I've had with friends and with family, and just times of goofing off. And it does change your perspective to realize that, we are not promised tomorrow. And so we have to appreciate it, and we have to make the most of our time.
Each day is a gift. And congratulations on all the grandbabies. And something that it's got to be cool, a cool feeling. And I know I've had this conversation with people a bunch with the things I've created, whether it's the independent movies I've made or this podcast even. These are things that we're creating that will live on. If, as tomorrow is not promised, as your grandchildren grow up, as my grandchildren grow up, if they want to sit down and spend some time with me and kind of get to know me in a way they wouldn't have been able to, your books, the podcasts, they live on. And it all stems from listening to that creative fire that's in your heart and what you leave behind. It's really a creative legacy, but you're able to put yourself into it. And congratulations on all of the things you've created, and especially the growing family. So we do love to celebrate works of art here on the show. And you mentioned you had a couple of readings from original works you'd love to share. What are those that you'd love to feature here on the podcast?
Well, the first one is from the first book of the Galactic Detective Agency, and that's called a Town Called Potato. As you might have noticed reading my other titles, I like to go with parody titles like Murder on the Gersu Express or The Big Sneap. This first book came from a different one. It came from one of my grandsons when he was 5, and he and I were out playing in the yard, and just apropos of nothing, he said, "A town called Potato." He said it was a town called Potato. And I thought, what does that mean? And so that stuck with me a couple of years. And I eventually decided that's going to be the title of this book. And and I named my protagonist after him. His name is Gabriel, as is the protagonist in the story. So this is early in the story, as he is just being recruited by the Galactic Detective Agency.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is a quick excerpt from A Town Called Potato.
As I got out of my car, I noticed someone standing on my porch, draped in shadows. The figure wore a dark robe. It was long, like a duster coat you might see in westerns, but with a hood covering the head. I stepped around the car and mounted the sidewalk. The figure stepped off the porch and moved toward me. In the fading light, the face was hidden inside the hood. What little of the cheek and chin I could make out seemed to have an olive cast. Not what people call olive-colored skin, which is just a term for someone with a Mediterranean complexion. No, this skin appeared to be literally the color of a green olive. I assumed it was some weird trick of the light. "Can I help you?" I asked. The robed figure moved its mouth, and a series of hissing sounds emanated from it. The form took another step toward me, giving me a better view. The hooded robe was made of soft leather, open down the middle and cinched at the waist by a belt and ornate buckle. Heavy leather boots extended below the robe's hem. The figure hissed some more and took yet another step. I began backing away. What in the world was this thing? "Look," I gulped, I think you have the wrong address. I didn't order anything. I'm already registered to vote. I don't need gutter guards." More hissing sounds. I was ready to turn and make a dash for my car when the figure raised an arm and pointed something at me. It was shaped vaguely like a gun. A sharp pain shot through my leg. I glanced down and saw a hypodermic needle sticking out of my thigh. I stared down at the dart sticking from my leg. Who was this creature? Why did it shoot me? How does something like that even happen to a guy who's just minding his own business? My head started swimming, and I dropped to my knees. I knew I couldn't stay where I was, not with the figure, whatever it was, moving toward me again. I pulled the hypodermic out and threw it away from myself and scrambled to my feet as quickly as I could, hopping on my other leg. What's the big idea? I tried to sound like a tough guy, though I felt like anything but that. I glanced at my car. Should I make a dash for it? It was locked now. Would I be able to unlock it and jump in before whoever this was attacked again? Taking another step toward me, the hooded figure stuck the gun into the belt of the robe. It continued to hiss, but this time with words beginning to emerge from the hisses. Hiss, hiss, understand, hiss, now. I mean you, no harm. No harm, huh? You call shooting somebody with a tranquilizer dart no harm? Good. You understand me now. It was not a tranquilizer. You're fine. You're Gabriel Lake, correct? The voice was cool, detached. I couldn't get a read on whether it was male or female. What do you mean, am I Gabriel Lake? Man, talk about shoot first and ask questions later. So this isn't some random attack then. You were planning on shooting me? If this isn't a tranquilizer, then what is it? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Sure, why should I worry about a hypodermic? It's not like you could have injected me with anything harmful like a toxin or a virus. I have a business proposal for you. So this was a potential client? 2 in 1 day. At least the trucking company guy didn't hiss at me and inject me with God knows what. You could have just sent me an email, I said, rubbing my sore thigh. I need you to help with a missing persons case. What do you mean? Like a database of missing persons or something? No, I need you to help me find a missing person. Look, whoever you are, I'm a computer programmer. I don't find missing persons. That isn't what I do. I have seen your file, Gabriel Lake. You're the leading expert in this locality on crime solving. What? No, I'm not. I've never solved a crime in my life. The figure was silent for a few seconds. You are Gabriel Lake, right? Yes, we agree on that one. I know you have studied crime extensively. The hooded figure pulled out a phone-sized device and tapped it a few times. The Maltese Falcon, the murder of Roger Ackroyd, murder on the Orient Express, if death ever slept. The list goes on. You have been identified as an expert on crime. Those are all novels, mysteries, detective stories. They're fiction. Rex Stout, Dashiell Hammett, Agatha Christie. And you have studied them, correct?
Ladies and gentlemen, that's a little bit from A Town Called Potato by Gary Randolph. You can find his work on Amazon, and Gary Blaine Randolph. You can find it there. It looks like available on Kindle or paperback. And that was so much fun. I love the humor that you just drop in there. I'm already registered to vote. I don't need gutters. What's this person doing at my doorstep? And what a great tool to draw us in. Love the concept of the, the alien thinking that movies were actual cases. Brilliant. And it's interesting to see, how writers and creators tie their own lives, sprinkle it in there. Like you mentioned, your grandson's name being the name of the hero of the story. And then that he's a computer programmer. Sounds a lot like your past. Mm-hmm. And do you generally in each of your stories drop things like that in there?
Well, yeah, it helps to know a little bit about what you're talking about. The book I just released last is called Trouble in Paradox, and it takes Gabriel Lake on a time travel adventure back into 1943. And that was interesting. I had to do a lot of research on 1943. Obviously, I wasn't alive then. But the thing is, parts of that world still existed in my childhood in the 1960s. Mm-hmm. And so, while I had to research a lot of things and spent a lot of time looking out, when was this word really used and this phrase? And how much did movie tickets cost then? Still, it was pretty easy to get back into that, just remembering the look and feel of things from the 1960s.
That's so much fun. And writing and creating can take us on different explorations and explorative journeys as well. It's so fun to hear, where the inspiration comes from, and then what work has to be done to present it in an accurate fashion. And I think, pretty much every creator writes about something that they're interested in or they know about. I have a book called Steal Like an Artist, and I forget the name of the author, but he says basically every piece of fiction could be considered fan fiction because the writers and the creators are writing about stuff that they're a fan of or stuff they knew about from the past because they're interested in it. So it's always fascinating to kind of examine that from writers. But and you had a second piece you'd like to share?
Yes. And this almost is like a fan fiction. I've always loved P.G. Wodehouse and his stories of Jeeves and Wooster, and a lot of people maybe they had an introduction to them through the 1990s series that starred a young Hugh Laurie and Stephen Fry, and if you haven't seen those are just excellent to watch. It's about Jeeves and Wooster are about someone kind of in a more of a mythical England with his valet. And so in my book, Viva Lost Vogus, I took an inspiration from those kinds of characters and made them space aliens instead. And so they are off. The hero is Pelham G. Totley, and his valet is named Blandings. And Pelham ends up in a lot of scrapes as things go along, and Blandings' resourcefulness gets him out of them. But here they're going to a planet called Vogus, which has a casino that has been modeled on Earth, on Las Vegas. And I can read this whenever you're ready.
Sure. Ladies and gentlemen, author Gary Randolph sharing an excerpt from his original book, Viva Lost Vogus.
Inside, the hotel gleamed white and pink with thick pillars, lush potted plants, and people of all species milling about. Blandings led the way to a shiny black counter and then stepped aside, allowing Pelham to assert his leadership. Behind the counter stood a thin person, significantly taller than the Haplers. The person wore a green uniform, the jacket buttoned up to his neck. The person's skin where showing was as yellow as butter, with green veining running through it. Instead of hair, the top of the head was crowned by a yellow bony crest with a dozen or more spiny points sweeping back. The person regarded Pelham with deep-set, baggy eyes and said in a monotone, "Welcome to the Pink Mingo. My name is Artie the Unfortunate. I am your hotel and casino host. May I help you today?" "Artie, you say?" Pelham asked. "Artie the Unfortunate." "Ah, well, Artie the Unfortunate. You keep saying that." The host stared vacantly. "It is my name." "Quite a moniker. Doesn't exactly trip off the tongue, eh?" Artie sagged visibly. "Perhaps not." I don't suppose you go by Artie for short." "No, sir. Going by part of the name has a potential for confusion. You see, there's also Artie the Honest, Artie the Dishonest, Artie the... Golly, how many Arties are there on this list?" "I'm not sure of the total number. I can count them. There's Artie the Honest, Artie the Dishonest, Artie the... I get the picture. Artie the Unfortunate, then." "That's it, sir." "I mean, what is it your spouse calls you when you return home after a long day's work?" "I'm not fortunate to have a spouse, sir." "Oh, sorry, Artie. The Unfortunate," Artie added. "I'm unmated myself. Personally, I prefer the single life. Not trying to minimize your feelings or anything, of course. Then again, I have Blandings here to look after me, but none of that is relevant. We have reservations at the hotel. The name is Pelham G. Tutley, and this is my man Blandings, as you might have already inferred. The unfortunate Ertie bobbed a heavy head in Blandings' direction and tapped on a device mounted on the counter. According to this, you're attending the G42 Interstellar Trade Conference. Indeed we are, or I am. Blandings, no doubt, will be using the time to improve his mind or some such. Pelham gazed around the elegant lobby. Quite the place you have here, Ertie. The unfortunate. Thank you, sir. Well, Lord Bugsy owns it. We Occho are only employees. Ah, well then, quite the place Lord Bugsy has. The host took a deep breath and let it out wearily. Then, as if someone had pressed the play button on a vid screen, Ertie the Unfortunate launched into an uninflected, memorized monologue. Everything before you, he swept out a hand mechanically, is based upon eyewitness reports from the Greys who monitor Earth. There is an actual Pink Mingo Hotel and casino on Earth in a city called Las Vogus. When Pardon, Pelham said, interrupting him. How did Earthlings come to name a city after this planet? Ertie looked confused. Oh, that is believed to have happened by accident. However, the Greys' reports of Earth are sketchy. Odd people, the Greys. Now, where was I? Ertie began muttering. Casino on Earth in a city called Las Vegas. Ertie's voice came back up to full volume. When Lord Bugsy heard the name of the city, he decided to replicate the experience here on the similarly named planet Vogus, launching the Zerk colony years ago. Today, we have all this. Pelham waited a moment before speaking. Thank you. Are you finished? I am, Mr. Totley. Didn't want to interrupt again. Much appreciated. One question, though. What is a mingo? It is a bird. A bird? Ertie's head nodded slowly. A bird is a vertebrate animal with wings and feathers, generally with the ability to fly. Right, I know what a bird is. Ertie pointed to a mural painted on the wall of a bright pink bird with legs and neck so long as to strain credulity. Here is one rendered as art. That's a mingo? It is pink, sir. I can see it is. But why are the legs and neck like that? So long, I mean. Could such a creature even exist? And if so, why? The mingo definitely does exist, Mr. Totley. And why is the rummy creature standing on only one leg? If I had legs that long and skinny and tried getting by employing only the one, I'd fall over, eh, Blandings? Quite possibly, sir. Take my word for it, Ertie. That beastie is mythical.
So intriguing and such a fun setup. We can't wait to dive into both of these stories. And so fun and fascinating how you can just create a world and create these characters and watch them live in it. But my hat's off to you. Getting published is like a huge thing, and putting yourself out there and putting the work into it. And I congratulate you on everything you've got there on Amazon and everything that's coming out. And is there anywhere else that you steer people other than Amazon to find your work?
They could go to my website, which is grstoryteller.com, GR as in Gary Randolph, storyteller.com. And that has links to the books. It's got overviews of my storytelling programs, and there's some videos on there of me singing songs and doing at least one poem from a storytelling gig.
That's great. Well, we're going to have you back on in the future with and feature your music and poetry, because we do that on this show as well. But I know we're up against the clock here, and it was just so wonderful to meet you virtually here. Thank you again for taking the time to come on COVE Podcast and introduce yourself and your work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. This has been fun.
What a pleasant and wonderful man.
Wow, and especially after, picking himself back up and going forward with his, cancer survivor. I mean, yes, there are cancers that are of different variations, but still, that C word.
Yeah.
There is. It's one of those words that can be very, very terrifying, and it takes a lot to get over.
Sure. Yeah, especially with all the preconceived, and he says it's a good one to get. There's a 75 to 80% chance of survival, but still, that's a huge 20 to 25% on the other side.
When my mom got cancer, it was very difficult in the beginning because she had a hard time understanding. Yes, it was treatable, and it was caught well before it became serious. But it's what that word has become known by and become renowned for that makes it just like, oh my God. So yeah, it's, anytime you can survive that and get through it. And then the beauty of this is that he went beyond just, he had to work through things, and he's built himself back up again doing something that he loves. And that's awesome.
It's very inspirational, and I feel like a bad host. Like, I dropped the ball. I didn't even realize he was a poet, and he had written some poems. Because we, as listeners know, celebrate poetry here on the show, and I think Craig found one that was deemed appropriate to share after Gary's story as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was kind of interesting because I was like, I've got 2 poems to select from. This particular one, because he said that one thing that's really important is to keep your focus, to keep your life going, and to have a great support system. Family, friends, doctors, and always, always, always to keep a positive attitude, a positive mindset, especially when you're going through it, because it does take a lot. It takes a lot from you physically as well as mentally. And I found kind of a tongue-in-cheek poem from a recovering stem cell transplant person who had cancer by Daisy and Jessica Marsh. And it was I found it on cancernet.co.uk. And of course, they got permission from Renee Marston from Contact Magazine to print it. So we've kind of taken care of our, sourcing where it came from here on the podcast. But I thought this was so good because it relates to what he said, having family, friends, doctors, the support system that you need to fight the C word.
Yeah.
And so this is Ode to the White Blood Cell by Daisy and Jessica Marsh.
As interpreted by Craig Jackman.
Welcome, greetings, little cell. What a wondrous sight you be. But please go forth and multiply, for more we need to see. You have a busy time ahead to fight the nasty stuff, so just go and find some mates, 'cause one ain't quite good enough. Don your armor, raise your sword, and into battle ride. Show not faint heart nor weak intent, 'cause we're all on your side. And then, victorious may you rise, in a host who's fit and strong. Then send him out into the world, he's been abed far too long. He just wants healthy bits and bobs, his arms, his legs, his hooter, so he can get right out of here and ride upon his scooter.
What's really really special about this is we get to hear the inspirational stories behind our entertainers and explore their journeys. If you're enjoying this show and you know anybody else who might enjoy it as well, please, I ask you to make a recommendation. Tell a friend about this show, or leave a review, leave a comment on the YouTube video. Every little recommendation helps, and we appreciate it. It helps little shows like this grow and keep going. Appreciate you so much for being here. Join us again next week for something completely different.